Dr. Ed Crowther, and some of you know Ed because he's been to visit us before, and he was a history professor at Adams State University now, right, for 30 years. And I'm sure he was one of the very favorites of all times. But anyway, he's retired now, and he sometimes is willing to come and talk to us, and we're very glad to have him. And you can tell us a little bit more about yourself too. Feel free.
I can.
Yeah.
So I'm a native of Vicksburg, Mississippi, and I've been in Colorado. You can't.
We can't hear you.
Okay, let me.
And there's the microphone.
So let me tell this
There
happened. This happened to me at a program I did back in the fall. I'm a very loud person. Nobody ever told me they couldn't hear me. It never had happened before. So this is the second time, and it happened in Veta. But as Mitzi, my wonderful hostess, says, I taught at Adams State for 30 years. My areas of expertise originally religion, and then it became, I wrote a book on Southern evangelicals and the coming of the Civil War, but later it evolved into religion and race, and then I write about African American religious history and things like that. And the cool thing about coming to Veta is I don't get to do any of that. I get to take a break and do something that I find really enjoyable. So let me say just what a joy it is to be with you this afternoon. How many of you read? And I kind of had to be careful putting the talk together. There were times that really I was overcome with emotion because the story is so powerful. And I enjoy doing stuff like this because my doctoral minor was in literature. So I finally get to do some literature. I never got to do literature much as a historian. And so with that, I hope you'll have me back sometime. But with that, let's move on to why I'm here besides seeing you, to talk a little bit about this book. And I just picked, it made sense, I couldn't come up with anything catchy, but Go as a River probably fairly falls in the category of historical fiction, right? And so there's a history here. And I got to tell you something that at first bothered me in the book, and then I realized that it actually was a strength. Victoria Nash doesn't know anything about World War II, even though it affected her directly. And so she had a child's understanding of what was going on. So she writes about her uncle and his brother going to fight in Europe, but coming home in the summer of 1942. There was no U.S. military action in Europe in 1942, but she wouldn't have known that. And so at first I thought, because I know the writer is brilliant and does her homework, and I thought, how could you? And then I realized that I was looking at this from the standpoint of expert, highly educated, adult analysis, and not feeling it the way that I would if I were 12 years old, which is where she was. And at the time, and so I checked this out. I know from teaching history that eventually on every newspaper, which of course her family didn't get, on the front page of the paper there would be illustrations of the progress in the European and Pacific theaters. That didn't happen in 1942 until late in the year when Operation Torch began in November the 8th, 1942. So I thought, wow, this is such a cool story because the stuff that doesn't resonate to an old geezer like me exactly would be the impression that a young woman would have experiencing things that were distant, far away, but hugely transformative and hugely impactful. So what I want to do is talk first a little bit about the history, and this is the outline so you know what we're going to talk about, and then take a little bit in turn. Iowa was a real place, and so it was kind of hard to find much about Iowa. although it reappeared in the year 2018 when we had a drought. There's a shot of the flagpole at the school. The school went through the 8th grade. And one of the people who had etched their name in the concrete was still alive in 2018 and said, yeah, that's me. And so when the Blue Mesa Reservoir dropped to an unbelievably low level, what was left of Iowa sort of reemerged. And one of the reasons it wasn't more of a big deal, they actually burned what was left behind at Iowa in 1965. They set everything that people didn't carry away, they set on fire. And so that's why there's not more. But I found this is from about 1950. And so this is a topographical map of Iowa. And what fascinated me, what I was looking for was a plat, and I just wasn't going to drive to Gunnison and go hunting around and find this. So I didn't find this, but I couldn't figure out the layout of Iowa because typically railroad towns are T-towns. That is, the rail comes through and then Broad Street or Main Street runs directly away from the rail line and it forms a T, right? And then you have a front street along the railroad and the body house is on the other side of the tracks. That's where that term came from. But if you can look at Iowa, it wasn't laid out that way at all. And it actually doesn't become a thing, even though people lived there as early as the 1870s. And when I say people lived there, white people who look like us living there in the 1870s. It doesn't become an actual town until 1896. The local lore is that they picked the name because they liked the way it sounded. It sounded pretty. Iowa sounds pretty. There is an Iowa, Kansas. It's named after the wife of the founder of the town in 1859. Iowa was not a completely uncommon woman's name in the 19th century. But either they borrowed it from Kansas or they thought it sounded pretty. And by the way, Shelley Reed's working title for Go As a River until very late in the process was called Iowa. So kind of a cool thing. So a real place. And so I was able to locate the kind of an aerial photograph. This is also from about 1950. And so you get an idea about where Iowa was located, where the things were located. If I were going to point out where the Nashes live, it's right about here. And where Victoria's going to have her adventure is this way. I don't have a shot of it, so it's kind of a fascinating thing to me. But a real place. And what Iowa was part of, this is a cool book. I just got it yesterday. I wanted it sooner, but oh well. David Primus is a local historian in Gunnison, and he wrote a book called Beneath Blue Mesa. And his research question was, what's buried underneath Blue Mesa Reservoir? And he goes from east to west, right? The same direction that Victoria Nash goes in the novel. And one of the sections is on Iowa. But it was part of, economically, a ranching community. There are a number of cattle ranches that run up and down the Gunnison River until you get to the Black Mesa, or excuse me, until you get to the gorge, and then you can't ranch there. But in addition to the ranches, there were also a number of fishing camps. It was almost like a resort area. People would go there and fly fish. One of the people who went there in 1951 to fly fish was Bob Hope. So Bob Hope went to this part of the world to fish. That same time, my father in 1950 rode on a bus from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, all the way out to a national forest in California to harvest gooseberry bushes to keep the pine rust off of the big redwood trees. and he rode on a bus with a fly rod down Highway 50. Down through just the fact that the same, but he and Bob Hope never met, so I'll settle that right away. This is the big building with the sign is the Iowa Hotel, and that observation point looks out over the Gunnison River. And this will give you an idea that Iowa wasn't very big and it wasn't densely populated. And of course, this is Iowa's connection with Veta, Colorado. This is the Denver, Rio Grande, and Western narrow gauge line that runs from Pueblo all the way over to Montrose and ultimately to Grand Junction. This railway was built, the Salida to Montrose part of the line was built between 1880 and 1882. And so the rail ran until about 1950, right? So to give about 70 years, Iowa was a railroad town, and you can see the chute for loading cattle. This part of the Denver, Rio Grande, and Western was a cattleman coal mine. They had discontinued passenger service in the 1920s because it wasn't viable. And of course, we learned from the previous book, we got the U.S. highway system. And before the interstates killed off the big railroad passenger service, the U.S. highway system killed off the passenger service for the small lines. And so it was a commercial line only, and that's why, of course, Will can jump on board a car and not have to deal with a conductor or any mean old nasty person like that. And this is what they did to really the three towns, and from, that's right, from your right to left, there's Iola, and then Cebolla, and then Saponero are the three towns that were flooded out. The flooding started in 1964, and the reservoir was considered full in the summer of 1965 with the runoff from the 64-65 winter snowfall. And it was very painful, a point that Shelley Reed brings out, for the people who live there, literally to be uprooted. And we're going to deal with this from a literary perspective about place and displacement, which are the two interrelated parts of this wonderful coming-of-age novel that's kind of a strange coming-of-age novel. We'll get to that. But these people were displaced, their livelihoods were taken away. There were not only cemeteries that relocated, some were covered up. And so a lot of change because of something that we'll deal with subsequently called the Colorado River Storage Project. So this is Iowa today. It's a boat ramp. And it's above where Iowa was located. And so it's on the south side of the Blue Mesa Reservoir. And so you can visit it there. Why did they need to flood Iowa? In 1922, and this is actually a current event in 2024 because we're about to get in a big fight and it's going to wind up before the Supreme Court, we created the Colorado River Compact, which is a way of allocating the very precious vital resources of the Colorado River among a series of states, right? Wyoming and Utah and Colorado and Nevada and all the way down California, right? And a book to read there are two books worthy to read on the subject. Philip Friedkin's book is called A River No More. So if you want to talk about displacement, we took a hot brown river and turned it into a cold blue water, almost stagnant river, right? We displaced the river. And why did we do that? In 1935, as part of the New Deal, a big dang deal for everybody, we completed the work on the Boulder Dam, that you know as Hoover Dam. And the idea was water storage in the arid West would be a good thing, and then you could use the energy in stored water to generate electricity through a water turbine. So that's kind of cool. So couldn't you do this further upstream? And so they built a second dam. And then in 1956, Wayne Aspinall, this is so weird about Colorado, He was the representative forever for the 4th Congressional District in Colorado. But the 4th Congressional District, when Aspinall was alive, is the 3rd Congressional District today. It's just how it happened. Wayne Aspinall's entire career coincides, and the book to read on this subject is Mark Reisner's Cadillac Desert. It's all tied up with water projects. And so one of the things, let me back up, I'll show you this, and you would miss it if you weren't paying attention. You remember one time I came and talked about wind and there were windmills? You see the windmill in that picture?
Yeah.
What do you think the windmill's for?
Water.
And you're wrong, but it's a brilliant guess. To generate electricity. To generate electricity. And so the idea was, so this is the time when the novel is set, the Rural Electrification Commission that's bringing electricity to these outlying areas had not completed its work. And then where are you going to get electricity from, right? You're not going to build a coal-fired plant in Gunnison, right? So the idea was you could store water to meet Colorado's obligation to California under the Colorado River Compact and generate electricity all up and down the upper Colorado River. That was the idea. Here's the problem. It didn't really work. And one of the problems is by the time you get way upstream, the Gunnison River, which is a tributary of the Colorado, that's why it's in the Colorado River Compact, it's just not big enough. I grew up in Vicksburg, Mississippi, where the Mississippi River is 1 mile wide. It's a real river. Now I live in Alamosa on the Rio Grande, and we call it the Rio Not So, because it's just one of those things. But this was the great era of can-do. There's a connection between Wayne Aspinall and the Colorado River Storage Project and sending Apollo 11 to the moon. This is the can-do time. And people did not realize at that time that if you could do something, you need to ask also if you should do something. And so you dam up the river, you change the ecosystem drastically. It even affects the elk migration. I've been told by people who know about these things. Disrupted people's lives and livelihoods, and you really don't get all that much electricity as a benefit. But you do maintain the ability to deliver the acre-feet of water required to the downstream states. But very little is actually stored in the Blue Mesa Reservoir, which is the biggest of 3. So there's the Blue Mesa, the Morrow, and the Crystal Reservoir on the Gunnison River before you get to Delta, where the Gunnison and the Uncompahgre come together, right? And then they run on up to what's called Grand Junction, because the original name of the Colorado River was the Grand River, and that's where the lower, smaller tributaries join the main channel of the Colorado. Here's a cool thing. So Aspinall becomes very famous and very powerful for delivering. I mean, imagine if you were a worker and you could be contracted to work and build a dam. I mean, that's employment. That was a benefit of building the Colorado River Storage Project. But by the time Aspinall was getting old, in 1972, we have an election in the 4th Congressional District, and that's when Patricia Schroeder was elected, and she represents the change in Colorado from this we can do, we must build, to we need to think about the environment. It's kind of a watershed moment. But if you go to Western State, I've given programs and sat in meetings in the Aspinall Center there, right along the side of Highway 50, about 12 miles east of Iola. So this is kind of a cool thing. It creates the historical context of why Victoria Nash and her family's homestead had to be inundated by a man-made lake. It's kind of a fascinating thing. So you're on this map right here. You can actually see Veta on this map. So this is a map of the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad that started with William Jackson Palmer, and so we got Colorado Springs, and eventually the line went down to the steel mills in Pueblo, and then up the old, really most of these lines were built adjacent to Automir's toll roads. That's why it was economically feasible to do this. Territorial Governor William Gilpin told Automir's that if he would go ahead and grade his toll roads, they would eventually be suitable for railroading. And so it's kind of a cool thing. And so that's Veta's connection with first Territorial Governor William Gilpin. But the mine that Victoria Nash lived on, just west of Gunnison, the next stop is Iola. 3 trains a day. And the writer, Shelley Reed, is absolutely spot on this point, that that's when they came through the town. And in those days, usually the railroads were on time. Just one of those things. So there really was an Iola. And there was this political culture that created the urgency to inundate Iola. But that's just the physical, historical construct of this beautiful, moving, powerful story. It's a work of literature. And what literature can do that history can't really do. I used to talk about, as a historian, where history runs out. If I don't have some kind of tangible, usually documentary evidence, I'm not allowed to guess what somebody was thinking or feeling. I can't assume what was going through Hitler's mind on June 6, 1944, beyond what the documentary record will allow me to do. But a novelist can speculate, a novelist can bring research and imagination together and tell a complete story. And when something works as literature, it needs to do 2 things. On the one hand, it needs to be aesthetically effective. It needs to have a beauty about it. And to give Stephen Colbert way more credit than he deserves, it needs to have a truthiness about it. It needs to resonate. This is what a young woman coming of age would think and feel, and how she might act under certain circumstances. And if it has a universal component to it, then it becomes great literature, it becomes world literature, the plays of Shakespeare, that type of thing. So because I like doing it, I enjoy it. So I read the book, and I always read with a pencil. And I literally went through the book, and I marked things that stuck out to me. This is what social scientists call coding. I look for themes. I look for continuities and discontinuities. There are more than this in the book, but I knew that you've got resilience covered. I don't need to help you with that. You probably have all of these covered as well. But these were the things that I thought that really, really stuck out as consistent themes in the book. And the first of these, female voice. One of the things, I'm a big fan of Norman Maclean. Everybody know who Norman Maclean was? I mean, A River Runs Through It is awesome. And my favorite is a short story called U.S. Forest Service 1919. It's a coming-of-age story. It involves a young man and let's say, a large woman of the evening. But Norman Maclean is a useful literary writer for us to reference. Women are auxiliary in all of his writing. He writes about men. Read a Zane Grey Western. It's all about men. And yet, one of the things that historians started to do 40 years ago, this woman, wrote a book called Westering Women. So if you think about this, this is actually in the book. The West is the land of manly men, but women find ways to exercise agency and make a place for themselves. The Sears Roebuck catalog, and you order dishes into your side home. You order draperies, right? And women realize that the men see them in the same way, just how it is, as cattle. Women do things that need to be done so men don't have to, so men can do manly things, but men really live in that Norman McLean world, right? Where did Norman McLean's father, when he goes fishing on Sunday afternoons with the boys, Mrs. McLean washes dishes, right, and cleans up after dinner. But I think also tries to maintain a rich inner life and a sense of integrity, and it's oblivious to the menfolk. And so I found Shelley Reed's narration about Victoria and the other strong women characters to be especially compelling. And so this was the first thing I saw, and I knew I'm going to do female voice if I only had this one passage, right? And I picked this deliberately. It's at the very beginning of the book. But yeah, who cleans the pee off the toilet? I can assure you, not Seth. And I know that Seth doesn't put the seat down. I can promise you that. This is the thing that I just found amazing. As a male reader, listening to Victoria and the other women go through their lives, things that I never ever experienced and never ever will. And so I know that this can happen. Childbirth alone, right? What an incredible story, right? And this is how she says, a merciful amnesia. That the pain is so much that you almost can't recreate it in your mind. And I thought, wow, that's a very powerful kind of a thing. And that's something that only a woman could say. No man can tell this story at all. I love this piece when women deal. I've often thought that there's just a real difference in the way that men and women regard children and love. There's some commonalities, but there's some differences. That because you give birth, you have this intimate relationship with your child. You have an intimate relationship with a partner, with a lover. And how do you manage that when that love goes away? Somebody dies, somebody leaves, and now, you're caught in that sort of dichotomous thing between grief and longing. I love the word bittersweet. The memories are powerful. The passion is real. The love is real. And that's why the hurt is proportional. Just one of those things. I had to do this. Zelda listened. I can assure you, in male literature, there is no writer who said, and George listened. No, George is mansplaining. George is out, fighting the river with his split bamboo fly rod. Zelda listened. And what does she know? You see how these two passages work together? She, too, had known loss. Wow. Just an amazing thing. So, Victoria has to unload a lifetime of grief on her first good friend in her whole life. And the good friend does something that you'll find in women's literature, you don't find much in men's literature. She listened. And she listened how? Empathically and experientially. She knew what Victoria knew. She too had lost. I love this one. When I saw it, I don't know that Shelley Reed read a lot of William Faulkner, but if she had read The Sound and Fury, this is about Dilsey. Dilsey endured, right? Women endure. That's what we do. And then, of course, with her friend, is helping her see that women can do much, 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 much more, right? A woman is more than a vessel meant to carry what? Babies and grief. I did cry at that point. It's such a powerful, authentic scene of two people who are very close, and they're sharing an aspect of what it means to be female. And it's a conversation that two women can have. I've been a preacher. I've listened to grieving people. I could not have this conversation with a woman because I don't have this experience. I can only have it vicariously. I know that you must feel this way. Thank you for sharing how you feel. I don't personally have the experience, so I can't have the feeling. So I thought the female voice was awesome, and I thought, what an amazing thing. In effect, to read a kind of a Western, right, set in the West, coming of age, adventure, all of that stuff, but it's a Western adventure story of a woman, so it's very different than Zane Grey. This is a coming-of-age story. I've read a lot of women's literature. It's a coming-of-age event. There's a brand new book out by a scholar. It's the first of its genre that I know of. It's a cultural history of menstruation. And people, we don't talk about this, so I'm going to do it. Another experience that I will never, ever, ever have. And globally, I did my research, 300 to 400 times in a nubile woman's life. 300 to 400 times. That's a fact. And of course, why is this a coming of age thing? You go from being a child to being able to bear children, right? It is an absolute marker. It's definite. And there's a before, like we think before COVID and after COVID. There's before and after, and then of course menopause, right? Huge thing. So for a child becoming an adult who is female, this is one of the great markers. The first time you fall in love. This part was weird for me. I have never understood what any woman sees in a man. I promise. It baffles me. I'm grateful. I'm honored, but I don't get it. I've been male all my life, and we're just not that much. But, you know, when you think about this piece, all of her growing up years, she had been an object in a family. She had been a beast of burden. And Will, she felt something for Will, and Will reciprocated it in a way that made her feel good about being Victoria. Right? That's a huge passage. As you're moving along what we call the road to self-actualization, you go through this process that's called individuation, where you become self-aware, and part of your self-awareness is how others perceive you. And isn't it nice to be appreciated, to be thought beautiful, to be thought desirable, to be cared about, rather than having expectations thrust upon. Prepositions are really powerful tools because they do a lot of work. So I love this scene. A woman making choices. Oh, and does it have a consequence? But a woman making choices rather than what? A timid. If you had grown up in my house, you learned to be timid. My father's hands, when they shook, there was going to be a consequence for your existence. But later, you learn that you don't have to be afraid, because no one can make you afraid. That's your response to something. I found that just really powerful. To me, this is the most beautiful line from a literary standpoint and a text full of rich phrasing. When Victoria comes back and meets her father, and that's, I wanted to do reconciliation, but we would be here all day. That is a beautiful story because Victoria first learned that Daddy's capable of love when he lost his wife. And Dad falls on his knees and falls apart. And then we learn that when Victoria went away, Daddy goes looking for his girl. But he doesn't know how to do the act of reconciling. And Victoria, because she's now a grown woman, knows this. And so why I put this in coming of age, as characters in literature mature, they develop the capacity for empathy, to anticipate and understand what other people are thinking and feeling, and modulate their behavior to be supportive. She loves her father. She understands. He was a slowly melting icicle, and I, a patient stream. And you see how that wonderful piece. So the river, right, here is a metaphor for the story, but for her life, for her development, right? And now she's become this aware person because she's aware of what others are thinking. And so she's able to have this realization. Lori and I are binge watching Dark Shadows. Anybody remember Dark Shadows? I love Dark Shadows. When I was a kid, I had Barnabas cards. I loved it. And we're fascinated because one of the characters, who is a kind of a marginal, she's not in every episode, is Julia Hoffman. And she's sort of the glue that holds everything together. And Victoria was this for her family. She thought as a young person, well, Mom and Dad, you know, and she realized she's the glue. And of course she winds up being the caretaker for her father. And winds up, you know, in effect helping her father die. Which is something, when you come of age, right, you're a child, and here are the old folks, you eventually become the adult. And you have to do the adulting, which includes seeing people, you know, people are born, and 100% of us die. Now there'll be a Baptist here who says, but wait, Enoch walked with God, he never tasted death. I know, trust me, I do. This was a piece that I really got this. I watched a 2-hour program with Shelley Reed with a book, talking to a book club, and so I know this is the thing because she said it was, and I thought, the author's a good source on their book. I loved Ruby Alice Akers, I really do, and I wanted to do Ruby Alice Akers. God help Ruby Alice Akers, amen. I love that. Every community has a crazy woman, except she's not really crazy. In fact, what she does is she creates a set of norms that work for her. She creates sacred space for her. She does it on her terms. She does not care that people think that she's crazy. And it turns out she's also a really good person. But she's not in a place, because Victoria is not yet in a place to have an adult friend. She's still a child, coming of age. But later, there's Zelda. And so what Shelley Reed says about this is that I sort of had to make Victoria come of age so then she could be loosed upon the world. She had to develop first, and then she was capable of telling a powerful story to a wonderful woman, right? But she couldn't do that when she was 17. She wasn't ready yet. This is why this is an unusual coming of age story, and why a woman's voice can tell this kind of story. Typically, when we write about men, you go on a trek, you go to the Middle East on the Crusades, you see the elephant, which means you either strike gold or you're in combat, and you have sex, right? There is a one and done, right? You're a boy, now you're a man. It doesn't work that way in this book. It takes Victoria a long time to come of age. And that's the gift of the river itself, the river of life. What I learned most about becoming is that it takes time. I know this only happened in my house because no one here was a miscreant like I was, but why don't you hurry up and grow up, right? I know no one ever said that to you. It doesn't work that way, and it never has, and it never, ever, ever will. This is one of the deep themes in the story, because you don't come of age in the cosmos, you come of age in Ioma, you come of age in Paonia, you come of age in a place, and the place helps you know who you are. It is a context, it is a metric, it tells you something about who you are. But that's not true for everybody, and it certainly wasn't true for Wilson Moon. I guess one place is as good as another. Victoria comes to realize why she doesn't believe that. She thinks he's completely wrong, until as she matures, she realizes, well, of course, if you're never welcome anywhere, place doesn't have meaning to you the way it does to someone else. This line is just beautiful. I just love how she, withered leaf on my barren family tree. She should have taught, right? Oh, she did teach writing. She should have. Right. Imagine growing up in a place and having to leave it under bizarre circumstances. She literally sold out. She literally did. And now she's ostracized, though there were moments when the community turns out to show support. But my gosh, to give up your childhood home where all your memories are, all your animals are buried. Abel, I loved Abel. What a great horse. But she has this opportunity for redemption. If I do right by the orchard. So you think about this. This is almost a resurrection, right? You're going to take something from a place that is no more and start a new life over again on the western slope. It's fascinating. She spent a lot of time talking to peach farmers in Paonia. So here's the fascinating thing. It would have been possible. There was never peach trees in Iowa, but it is possible to grow them there. She had to make sure that that was a thing. But she spent a lot of time learning about how you would transplant mature peach trees from one place to another. Just one of those things. Oh, and by the way, Seymour Greeley, she was born in Greeley. That's where that name came from, the writer. Just one of those things. I thought it was cool. She had to work Western State in there somewhere, so because that's where she worked. I love this bit about going to the western slope. In part because Shelley Reed loves nature, and in part because she has more of an indigenous approach to the human interaction with nature. Nature's bigger, and she's a part of it. She doesn't control nature. She doesn't dam the river, right? But she goes to a new place, and because she's doing right by the land, right? The land chose to keep her and to sustain her. I thought that was just beautiful. In the question and answer session she did with the book club, Shelley Reed spent, I didn't see this coming really, she spent 20 minutes talking about race, racism, and ute removal, which for her was a major part of the story. It explains Will, how he came to be and how he died. But it also is a metric, right? Somebody's coming of age in a time and place, and they're experiencing joy and sorrow and triumph and tragedy. But people before you, the Utes, had experienced this. And so I put a slide in just because I can. This is something I've actually written about. Systematically, when Colorado became a territory in 1861, the first thing we did was remove the Utes from the plains right up to the Front Range. And then in 1863, we kicked them out of the San Luis Valley. And then in 1868, we kicked them up into the San Juans, except we discovered silver, and so we carved out in 1873 the Bruneau Agreement, and we kicked the Utes out further than that. And then, thanks to the wonderfully arranged death of Nathan Cook Meeker, the Meeker Massacre, the White River Massacre, we kicked the Utes out of Colorado entirely, except for a little sliver where the Mountain Ute Reservation is around Ignacio, Colorado. I will tell you this true story, and we know that it's true because there are multiple sources. Otto Mears engineered a vote among the Utes, and then the Department of the Interior, Carl Schurz, they reimbursed Otto Mears $2,914. That's how much he paid for the vote to kick the Utes out. So the Utes must go. That was a major thing. If we'd been in the 1870s in Colorado, the Utes must go. And we kicked them out at gunpoint, right? And so this being displaced is not the first and only time. And so the Winninootsii were the Utes that lived where Iowa is. There's 7 bands of Utes in Colorado. In the 1870s, there would have been about 6,000, we think. Place and displacement. This is Lucas. What a powerful story he has to go to Vietnam. And it's fascinating how much of this story is set in 1970. Fascinating to me. So much happened, right? So in 1970, Apollo 13. In 1970, oh my God, I remember it like it was yesterday. On April the 30th, the United States military went into Cambodia. Nixon comes on TV and naturally prevaricates in a very truthful, believable manner. And then, of course, we all remember May 1970, 4 dead in Ohio. Company G, the Ohio National Guard, 67 rounds fired on a university campus. I'm not happy about that today. We don't need guns on campus being shot at students. And they shot over the head of the protesters. Ms. Krause was going to class when she was killed. It's a terrible thing. So we have this thing about the draft, the lottery call, right? You don't belong fighting a war, right? I didn't raise my boy to be a soldier. And he says, well, you know, you're right. I don't really want to be a soldier, but it's better than having no place at all. I don't know who my mother really was. You've told me my whole life was really made up. It's a lie, it's make-believe. I don't know when exactly I was born. I don't know that I can trust you anymore. And so that's sort of the ultimate displacement. When you're mentally displaced from what you believed was your family unit, it's a very powerful thing. You can't escape this. And I know today, Tony and I were talking about the world that we live in and things that you're not supposed to talk about. I talk about the double helix of United States history. And one is the aspiration of liberty and opportunity. That is a fact. And I'm about as far left as you can go, and I could say, this is a fact, I can prove it. But the other part of the double helix is who gets to participate. And we define that on racial terms and on gender terms. And we have since 1607. There's not a time that there wasn't this, right? We said to Powhatan, you can't be part of this in 1607. And then in August of 1619, we say to 20 and odd is the African, you can't be part of this. You can only be property. And so it's deeply written here. And here the story is always about Will being Native American, and whether we look at people like Pratt at the boarding school, we want to kill the Indian to save the man, whether we look at removing the Utes, or in the case of Will, where we look at dragging a guy to death. I don't know that she used Jasper, Texas as a reference, but do you guys remember this?
Yeah.
Yeah. People who look like me have done some pretty despicable things. And yeah, you can say that, well, they were young. Well, they're old enough to know right from wrong. Just one of those things. And so, yeah, how do we know that there's racism? What's a half-breed? You've got an adult saying to a young child, you're not welcome here because you're not human like I am, because you're mixed. There's something the matter with you. Just one of those things. I hope Will is wrong. I really do. But I have a sense we live in a world where it looks like Seth are everywhere. And so you know that when Lucas was growing up in Durango, a college town, that people looked at him funny and they treated him differently and they abused him when they could, because of who he wasn't, because he wasn't white. Just one of those things. This is, you know, as a male reader reading a woman's voice who is a mother. She's got 2 children. They're college age and young adult. So she's going through the empty nest syndrome phase of her life, she says, and not too happy when they don't visit often. This is where the entire story came from. Shelley Reed likes to camp, and they were camping in the National Forest west of Gunnison, and she saw a doe come out of the woods with 2 fawns. That is where she got the idea to write the story. This is not just contextual history, this is the history of the book. And what an unbelievable thing, right? And I realize how much of this is in the literature that I've read. I read Toni Morrison's Beloved. I read Sophie's Choice. Things that women have to do, and because they have been the ones that have given birth, I have a sense that it's harder to make these choices. Does the name Margaret Garner mean anything to anybody? Ever heard of Margaret Garner? If you'd been alive in 1859, it would have been front page news. Margaret Garner's story is where we got Toni Morrison's Beloved. She was enslaved in Kentucky. She was able to take her children, her 2 children, and flee to Cincinnati. And so just so you know how bad things were, Cincinnati's in Ohio. It's a free state, except it's really not. Somebody ratted her out, and she cut the throat of one child and was in the process of cutting the throat of the other when she was taken into custody. And you know what they did to her? Re-enslaved her. Sent her down to Mississippi and then to Louisiana. Just one of those things. And so, you know, you think about the choices that women make with their children. I would rather my child not live than live as a slave. I want my child to live, so I will give him up. I can't imagine having to make that kind of a choice. And I sit there and think, well, gee, you know, do I buy or do I rent? Oh, what a dilemma. Really? No. Easy. Living life on scholarship. Just one of those things. This is Zelda's story. 6 miscarriages. 6. And one time it was far enough along. You don't get over that. But she kept trying. She did. Just one of those things. The choice was motherhood or madness. This is Inga Tate's story. I learned from sitting in on a book club discussion. Next to Victoria, Inga is Shelley Reed's favorite character. And in fact, what she said, the hardest part was to cut Inga out. She wanted to tell a much bigger story. She suggests, she's working on a new novel, And I have an idea that Inga Tate is going to make a return visit, because she loves Inga, just one of those things. When Inga realizes that all of her dreams are shattered, this is a funny coming of age piece. Every time one of these characters goes on the university campus, they run into a guy, bad things happen, and their life is irrevocably altered, right? And so you wind up in Durango, Colorado, and you're never going to get that university degree. You're never going to have that life that you dreamed of. And now you're raising your own child and forest mother's child. I love that term. That was beautiful. Forest mother. Awesome. Motherhood or madness. Sort of making peace with your circumstances, finding something redemptive in the hard work of raising a child. Right? And you're not getting any help from Paul. Paul is busy being important. I can tell you that a university professor at a small state college is not an important person. But he thinks he is. And you know what's funny? He ends up becoming the real loser. He gets the boot. 70% of all divorces in the United States instituted by women. And this pattern of female-instituted divorces goes back to the American Revolution. There's an interesting book by Linda Kerber on this subject, that liberty to emancipate yourself from an impossible, intolerable situation. Inga again, thinking about Vietnam. I almost did it, and I decided I don't want to subject you to it. I've got some really horribly graphic pictures from a place called My Lai 4 in April of 1968, where your tax dollars and mine paid for the murder of 300 people in a village for the crime of living while Vietnamese. We dropped more ordnance in Vietnam than in all warfare in United States history up to that time. Napalm. You've seen the picture of the young, she was 10 years old running naked. The nape had burned her clothes off. I mourned for the mothers. Only a woman who had lost a child could have this deep, empathic grief for other mothers. They're on the wrong side. They're communists or commie sympathizers. No. They're women who have children, and we're killing their children. Right? 2 million Vietnamese died during what was really the Third Indochina War, but you'll call it the Vietnam War. 2 million. About 58,500 United Statesians. Now, I go to the wall, and it's hard. We had a series of grants, and we would go to the Vietnam War Memorial, and in 2 years, we hit it on Father's Day. It's not a good time to be at that wall. There was one, Grandpa, I wish you knew me. My name is Timmy, I'm 6. Stuck in that granite that my men put together. It's an amazing thing. There was it was like a poem that you would see where children were placed in adoption. And it was for the child. And it was called Two Mothers' Love. One who gave you life and one who taught you to live it. So an adopted child has a birth mother and another mother. And they're both vital. And that was the idea. And so she had held me in her heart these many years, just as I had held her. 2 mothers of the same beautiful boy. That was such an amazing meeting. I mean, I can't imagine how to imagine it. I could not have written this part. I wouldn't have known to write this story. But 2 mothers, right? I have a sense, because this book we'll talk about Lucas a little bit. It has what we call an open-ended ending. So we don't know what happened. So I likened it, talking to a community group, to the ending of Gone with the Wind. We don't know if Starlet ever gets Red. We know where Red is. Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. I'll think about that tomorrow, for after all, tomorrow is another day. We don't know how this story is going to end, and that's part of its power, it's part of its majesty. But there is a hint. You remember the scene where Victoria's having a dream, and she's running and the ground won't support her? And the ending, the ground is firm. And so there's a reason to hope. I'll go as a river. My grandfather always told me that it's the only way. And so we have this notion about river. And just like this is a coming-of-age story, river comes of age in this story. We have the Gunnison, and it's going to be dammed up, but the river follows the path of least resistance. That's what it does. But that's not only what it does, right? The river can be acted upon by nature. Just as choice can change the course of somebody's life, nature can change the course of the river. The town where I grew up, the Mississippi River used to flow right down in front of the city. And in 1876, yards from where General Grant tried to build a canal to bypass Vicksburg, the river changed course in one night. And Vicksburg was left high and dry. Isn't that amazing? The mighty Mississippi could change its course due to rainfall upstream. It's just one of those things. This is another time when we can see the ability of Victoria to make sense of her life as she is in the process of becoming. When Ruby Alice Akers is dying, go as a river. Let go. Don't hang on anymore. I thought that was just beautiful. This was her gift to the woman who had shown her so much care and affection, was to help her end her life and move on. There are three rivers in this story. There's the Gunnison, then there's the North Fork of the Gunnison, and then there's the Animas River, right? The river of souls, right? Love that. And it's fascinating. Throughout this story, the rivers give a sense of place, but they also are a source of solace and healing. And that's an amazing, powerful image of the power of nature to give back to you, the broken human, to give you a sense of that you can go on. We finally get the very end of the book. We finally get the fullness of the river. It's Victoria's path, but along the way, just like a mighty river, it picks up detritus, it carries sediment, it carries all of the experiences that it has when it runs its course. This is what happens to Victoria. As she becomes a mature woman, she is a product of Ioma. She's a product of her lost love for Will. She is a mother, right? Hoping to build a relationship with her son. She has a friend that is rock solid, and she has finally become fully self-actualized. Right? What a powerful thing. So I just find that fascinating. Taking and giving in quiet agreement with every living thing. I mean, that's the idea of the water being connected, of our lives being connected to all of the experiences that have shaped us. I like this. This is really the very beginning of the book, and this is your resilience piece. This is the sine qua non of resilience. The Gunnison River has been dammed up. Right? The Colorado River has been dammed up, but it's still a river. And it has this inexorable force My father ended up working for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, so this is a world that I know probably better than I know my own world. I know what the word poderology means. That's the science of river. Think about it. Poder sounds like hippopotamus, river horse, right? Baton Rouge, Louisiana sits, it's a bizarre place, but it's situated where the Mississippi River's main channel today moves in a different direction, almost 90 degrees from the old channel, which is what's called the Atchafalaya Basin. But because the river at this point, you know, we talk about, oh, we had a stream flow, we had 1,000 cubic feet per second. Well, the Mississippi we measure in millions, and it's just a bigger body of water. The main channel of the Mississippi River doesn't want to make that hard turn to the east. Something caused this to happen years ago. And so the engineers have put heavy concrete matting, steel revetments. I watched steel float in the Mississippi River during the 1973 flood. Pieces of steel. Water is so powerful. The engineers talk about when, not if, the Mississippi flows back into the Atchafalaya. That all the tax money we can spend, all those brilliant engineers, all of their machinations, the annual maintenance, it is an inevitability. It is only a matter of time that that river bursts through. You know, we think at some point Boulder Dam is going to fail because it's built in a lot of sandstone, and you can get leaching and then erosion that's not visible because the exterior looks clean, but it's hollow underneath. Eventually, the river is going to have its way, right? It's going to continue to flow. And that was one of the beauties, I thought, in the story when we thought about Victoria coming of age, right? And then we have this open ending. She's going to continue to go as a river. And it may lead her to this wonderful relationship with her son, and it may not. We just don't know. And that's one of the beauties of this really brilliantly written novel, is that it, as literature, it has a kind of authenticity. We're all carried along by the events of our lives, and we really don't know what's going to happen next, but we bring with us all of our experiences. And if you think about the majestic power of water, we have the capacity to confront and encounter and even overcome, like the mighty Mississippi or the Gunnison, any obstacle that's put in our way. Thank you for letting me read this book. I loved it, and I so much enjoy the opportunity of talking about my perspective on this book with this wonderful audience. I'm happy we can talk more, ask questions. 47% of all statistics are made up on the spot, and 100% of what I say is made up on the spot. So there it is. Well, I guess no questions, comments?
I don't have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I heard, I'm terrible about, when I have the TV on, and I'm not sitting really paying attention, I'm off in the kitchen doing it, and I hear little bits and pieces of stuff. So I can't remember. I can't remember what dam this story was about on the news this past week. They're tearing the damn thing down.
Right, and it's because...
And I went, yes, I don't believe in damming.
No. And it's really funny, you know, if there are floods, I'll give a damn, but otherwise, no.
Yeah.
And so what we've learned is that the benefits don't really justify the cost, particularly long-term and ecological. Yeah. It's on the
Washington.
Klamath River. Yeah. And boy, you talk about, that's a powerful river.
Yeah.
But you kill the fish, then that affects the bears, and it just, one damn thing after another. And,
Don't fool with Mother Nature.
Yeah, listen to your mother, listen to your mother, nature, yeah. And it's fascinating, and I thought that the late Mark Reisner, who was he was with the National Resource Defense Council in Cadillac Desert. He is one of those writers that, when Pat Schroeder was still in Congress and still alive, when we started to realize that things that we were doing, well, the term we use is blowback, that we do things and then there are these consequences, and it's like, well, why didn't we think about this? Here's one. This was a story the last 2 weeks. I don't know how long it's going to have currency. AI. So we all know what AI is, right? AI has a galactic environmental cost. AI facilities use a lot of water. And AI facilities require a lot of lithium. Do you know what state we're placing most of the AI facilities in? Arizona, which has precious little, wait for it, water and lithium. And we're like, haven't we done this before? But what happens, we had the wonderful experience of having Temple Grandin in our community in the San Luis Valley. What an amazing human being she is. Talk about a woman's voice, right? She's the original horse whisperer. She's amazing. But she said something that is absolutely true. That we have people that have ideas and they get in a room with people who want to monetize those ideas. There's nobody with any ethics in the equation in the decision-making process. Should we do this? Maybe we shouldn't. And the argument always is, if we don't, somebody else will. Well, maybe we need to figure out countermeasures. I don't know, but that's fascinating to me. But it's been a goal of a large part of the environmental movement is to return these rivers to nature. And just one of those things. And of course, now we don't. I mean, in 2018, the Blue Mesa Reservoir was close to dry. I mean, it was just, we had no snowpack in the mountains that year. Yes?
One of my favorite quotes about this issue is, only those who have apprenticed with nature can be entrusted with technology.
Yeah, I'm like that. And that, there ought to be a law, right? But no, I mean, it's fascinating. So my father worked for the Corps of Engineers, but he was a biologist. So he was the adversary. He's the guy that wrote the environmental impact statements. And the big takeaway, the best gift, he taught me two things. He taught me how to work. But he also taught me how to work with adversaries. Because the Corps of Engineers doesn't want to be told no. And particularly by some nature-loving biologist, right? And it's the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Do you think generals take no for an answer? Absolutely not. And they're no better at data-based decision-making than anybody else, right? Vietnam War, anyone, right? Just think about these kinds of things. And so it's fascinating that we really do make decisions often with little heed to unforeseen circumstances and often foreseen calamities. I mean, if you jump off a building, you're going to die. Don't do it. It's just one of those things. Yes?
All those things are accurate and a good description of how we've evolved in our understanding of how things are. But there have always been breaks in there too. I'm thinking, I spent a good amount of my career in rural Alaska.
Yes.
I remember talking to native groups up there in northern Alaska. The Corps of Engineers back in the 50s wanted to build a major dam on the Yukon River at Rampart. The native community, and it would have been a major economic benefit for the state.
Right.
The native groups, this is before the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act was even in place. The native groups were able to get that stopped.
And because they have a very different perspective.
There were pockets of this enlightenment all along.
All along. You can go back to John Muir and others, the original conservation movement. So this would be a hard, I don't know how, it'd be a long list, and I don't know how we evaluate it, but on the long list of dumbest things the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has ever proposed, we don't have a whole lot of water in Arizona. We have a whole lot of water. The community where I grew up gets 50 inches of rain every year. We think Seattle's dry. They only get 37 inches of rain. There's a lot of water in the lower Mississippi River. So they decided in the 1950s, this is what we're going to do. We're going to build a giant pipeline from the Mississippi River all the way out west. Here's the problem. It's called the Balconies Escarpment. Do you know that water is really heavy? And it takes a lot of energy to make it run uphill, even if you have a lot of money. And it would take, so that when the engineers start doing these calculations, they realize that it would take all the energy that is produced to get the water across the state of Texas, and then you've got New Mexico before you can get to Phoenix. And so by the time I get to Phoenix, we'll be broken out of power. It's amazing. But there are people, I mean, there was some wonderful journalistic writing. I've forgotten this woman's name, but she has been a journalist covering people like Bill Gates from about 1980 to now. And so Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, and all of this. And she had this amazing observation about these obviously intelligent people, that there is almost a kind of an arrested development. And she had written a book earlier about, you know, they eat Jell-O and pudding like kids, and Capri Sun drinks, and they're in their 30s with Harvard, and you know, slides in the office to go from the 3rd floor down to the 2nd floor. And this was her observation. She says, you know, they never think about the notion that maybe we shouldn't do something that we could do. So we're dealing with this right now with electric cars. I mean, yeah, Tesla, great. But you know that fire departments have a special protocol to put out that sort of rear battery axle thing because it's hot. And it takes a lot of water to get this thing to go out. And then where are we going to get the lithium from? And it's like, maybe, right? But the debate has always been with technology that the solution to the problems of technology is more technology. And to this point, I think that it's much more mixed than that. I mean, cancer research, look at what we've done with cancer research. Wonderful, right? But there are other things that we do because we can that aren't so wonderful. Damming the Yukon River is almost as bad as, it's almost as bad.
Well, it's a denial of the dark side.
Yeah.
You know, anyway.
No, I think, so, from time immemorial, you know, people have struggled with what we call the problem of evil. And often, right, the demon is not the monster under your bed, it's the one that's in you in the bed. And that's a hard thing that, I used to call it the Crowther and rule, and it went something like this. The stuff that works for you really works for you until it doesn't. And that's what happens with a lot of things. And it's an amazing kind of a phenomenon. Yeah, I don't know how we got on technology. We were talking about rivers, right? So,
You know, there's always trade-offs. The dams prevent the floods.
right?
Look at all of the agricultural products that are floated down a river instead
Absolutely.
of using carbon fuels to go across the country.
Right.
You know, there are always trade-offs.
One of the best, she, in this thing I watched, she did an amazing job, Shelley Reed, making that point, because she's talking to a book club, and they hate dams, and she's the author of the book, and I'm sure she didn't celebrate the flooding of Iowa, but that was the point she was making to the book club about the trade-offs. There was electricity, right? There were jobs. There is water storage. But there are also consequences. And sometimes they're pretty deleterious. It's one of those things. Yes, sir?
You
made a statement about, from the early days of our country, he said two things, I can't remember what they were now, about, that, about liberty or.
The
but
double helix.
Yeah,
right.
the double helix, what
Yeah,
was
so
that?
liberty and opportunity. There is no doubt that, so if I went into a class and it was called Your History Sucks, I would still have to teach this because it's true. I cannot deny that what is self-evidently true. But the other piece is, it's like liberty and opportunity for whom? And so that's always been the debate. So when the Greeks developed democracy, which all that word demos means people. People say, oh, it means majority rule. It means rule by the people, right? Monarchy, rule by one, right? Democracy, rule by the people, demos, right? Who are the people? And who makes that decision? We say, well, if you're not 18, you're not a person. When I was younger, you were a person at 21, right? Isn't that amazing? And so we've historically said, Wilson Moon, you can't be part of this because of who you are not. And it's, don't need to talk about current events, but aren't we talking about this today in 2024, right? Who gets to choose, right? And one of the things fascinating, this is my world, dealing with these kinds of things. And people will talk about, I don't understand privilege, they will tell me. And that is the number one predictor that you have privilege, because you don't have to think about, I'm always going to get to vote. I thought about my mother with dementia voting in the last presidential election that she voted in. She had dementia, but she was an educated white woman. Nobody's kicking her off she had dementia. And I'm not arguing for or against, but it's like we worry about who counts, sometimes in some ridiculously foolish ways. I'll get myself thrown out with this one, I promise I will. But I used to think about how to discuss an issue like this, and I said, so I have a proposal. We're going to move everybody out of the United States completely. And we're all going to go down to Tierra del Fuego, right? And the first 300 million of us that make it back across can stay. And so who's going to make it back? People who are resilient, who are inventive, who are creative. Aren't those the kind of people that you want? And I think about the kinds of people that we often say, well, they can't come in. Albert Einstein had to get kind of special permission to come in because he was a Jewish ancestry, and we didn't like Jews in the 1930s. Albert Einstein, all he managed to do was to get the United States government to understand that the Nazis were working on nuclear fission, and we better figure this stuff out because the cost would be. I feel badly for Japanese who died. Imagine if Hitler had gotten the bomb. Do you know, by the way, why we have so much information on the death camps? We were looking primarily to find out how far the Germans were in nuclear development. That's why those teams were going out. And it turned out, the Crowtherian rule of one, what works for you until it doesn't. Hitler got this idea that all the physicists were Jews, and so this nuclear fission thing couldn't be right. And so it got, after 1942, the Germans almost don't do anything. But it's fascinating to me about the notion of who gets to count. We would say, I think about all the people that we give Nobel Prizes to and all that, from Dr. King to mathematicians, that at one time were systematically excluded from being part of the body politic. It would be a terrible thing to lose those people.
This is part of the wonderful aspect of our government is we have protections for the minority.
Yeah. We do.
We don't have majority. The minority has protections that are built in.
But my argument, I don't need protection. It would be, because So there was a wonderful book when I was on the University Press Board of Colorado, and it was published by a Utah State Press subsidiary, and it was a writing by women, and it was called Presumed Incompetent. And so there's that aspect about we protect people who don't necessarily have the means to protect themselves, and that's a good thing. And we protect them from people who have the means to do harm. My ancestors owned people, right? My ancestors wore hoods and those kinds of things, and there were no protections at that point. And it's an ongoing debate about who deserves what and who gets to decide. And is something that benefits someone discriminating against somebody else who doesn't have that protection or that right or that liberty. And that's a hard calculus to work with and resolve.
And that's why it's an ongoing process.
Right.
We're trying to get better every year.
I love that aspirational piece. I think, and it showed up in the recent State of the Union. And so I'm going to stop, I promise. But I love this. But the good thing about, where's Tony? We were talking about this before. There are evil people. There is no doubt. There are people that don't care about others, that wish to do them harm. But we know that there are a lot of really good people out there because we're still here, we're not dead, and we're still trying. You know, God help Ruby Alice Akers.
Yes.
I mean, and so that is an absolute thing. So, you know, one of the why do I love the government? It's because it gave me so much, but it took a lot. My uncle died on the 26th of January, 1945, in Luxembourg, on a river crossing. And it haunts me. I hope he never got his head blown off. I hope he didn't lay there and bleed out. And what does he say, right? His parents divorced because his father had signed up for him to enlist at 17. And when my father came home from the war, he went to that house. Haunts me still. But this is what came out of that. My father went to the university, LSU, go Tigers, G-E-A-U-X, Tigers, and he got a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. And you want to talk about the river of life. I grew up in Mississippi. And if you read books, people thought you were effeminate. But not in my household. You see, my father was educated. Now, sometimes that was hard because if I brought home a bad grade, there was hell to pay. Thou shalt not. But I remember the night before I got my PhD, and I had to pick up the big doctoral hood. And we're staying in a hotel in Columbus, Georgia, near Auburn, right? And my father put that hood on and strutted around. I think that was the one time I'd done something that made him happy. And so, you know, you have something as horrific as World War II. And it took a lot. But it also created opportunities. My mother worked at the Army Medical Library in 1944, 1945 in Washington, D.C. It's where the Air and Space Museum is now. And we didn't have the internet. You'd have to get all this latest research out to field hospitals and other kinds of things. And so, you know, your whole life is shaped, you know, your river. I'm a product of World War II, right? In the same way that Victoria is a product of displacement because of the Colorado River Storage Project. And and we all have those stories. Every one of us has these things that make us who we are and hopefully keep us trying to move down the good water. You know, the word Curacanti, the Blue Mesa Reservoir, one of its connotations is stinky water, because it's still, so it's still water, muddy water, you know, and it's kind of a fascinating thing. So when we dam a river, we really do change its character, and it's not always a good thing. But I appreciate the opportunity to hang out with you guys. And anybody else want to, we can talk about the price of tea in Sri Lanka. I've got a map, I do. Yeah, just one of those things.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.